Yeah, welcome all to the fourth and final installment of this Alternative Histories talks. These sessions are organized with the Drawing Matter Foundation relating to the Alternative Histories exhibition that was on show earlier in London and Brussels. In October, we'll have our show in Dublin in the Irish Architectural Archive. So please all look out for that. Alternative Histories dealt with the elementary strands of thoughts that can be contained in a sketch or a drawing. A thought within the realm of architecture, not necessarily in need of any purpose. Where Alternative Histories tried to connect the strands contained within the drawings to the thoughts and design patterns circling contemporary practices today. These stories that we're having here now in quarantine try to interweave observation and thought patterns of the participants through snapshots from their trips, books in their cupboard. In a way, similar to sketching, they can all contain a fragment or a first thought, which is something I'm hoping to explore here. We loosely prepared some narratives, as you heard, quite loosely this time today, which I afterwards rearranged in an order that makes sense, hoping that a conversation can be had between the participants in the process and new discoveries are made in the space in between. We're happy to be part of this 100-day studio, which is organized by the Architecture Foundation. We're mainly grateful for the informal nature of this 100-day studio and that we can somehow explore these very loose formats without feeling that we are not doing our utter best. So we're trying to have these conversations about things that excite us like amateurs in that sense, rather than professionals. So no professionals outside, but amateurs in our living rooms, and amateurs in the French sense of the word of amour, loving something you do. In total, we have discussed 4 topics, so this is the 4th topic. We discussed order, assembly, and nature the past weeks, and today we'll talk about ambiguity. We have here today the wonderful Liza Fior of MUF, Architecture and Art, the wonderful Oda Paelmke from Berlin, and the wonderful Tomas Dirrix from Rotterdam. Neil and I will also be here, like always, and Matt together with Neil in the archive as conversation partners. And we can reflect on the materials through drawings from the archives or through images from my own travels in the process. I've tried to put things in an order, but in a way there's no beginning and there's no end. And we'll just see to let the conversation last as long as the hour lasts. So let's start off. So here we have, if you want to see how all these names are written, them online, and we'll talk about ambiguity. And we'll start with Oda about selective ambiguity, subjective ambiguity. Thank you all. Thank you, Oda.
My turn now?
Yes.
So when Marius asked me to talk about ambiguity, and asked me to send some pictures, I selected 3 pictures and not 30, which is this first one, which is my collection of ideas that was temporarily in my office. You see that it's just post-its, which name world famous architectural projects written on post-its, printed on the huge mirror which sits in my office. And this is a snapshot of this situation. So I would say, me as an amateur photographer, I was in the mood to just take, remember the situation, which is which was happening there for half a year and has been changed every 10 minutes, because it was this collection of ideas of these post-its, always rearranged. Why? Because everything you are interested in, it's these images that you take on journeys, or so, what kind, these images that we actually want to show us here today, organized, remembered, put into a subjective arrangement, because the ambiguity of every item is that it changes its meaning wherever you place it. It's related to its neighbor. So what is it's what has been, it came out as the book Repertoire 7 at the end. It's moments of ambiguity, which I would say. So when Marius called me and asked, might you be interested, I immediately felt yes. And they are placed on a mirror. The mirror appears later on once again, because you have to look at things always through the mirror, because this is the place where they show their best side. This is where they show themselves how they want to be seen. Shall I say now next, or do you decide when you take the next?
Sometimes the one, sometimes the other.
Exactly, the pictures 2 and 3. That because my first answer was not of an amateur but of an architect, so this was the idea. The second picture is the demolition of Galerie Gerhardsen-Gerner. And Marius' first attempt was, a picture of a construction site. And I said, no, it's a picture of a demolition site. And this is the second way to look at things. We built this gallery in 2001, and it lasted so long for a Berlin gallery, unimaginable 15 years. Much longer than regular, and then the gallerist decided to move due to the art market, and this is an amateur project of photographing the process of demolition. And I thought, so this is about materiality, architectural also idea, materiality, the nexus function. And this, I was so interested in seeing this empty wall. It was a monumental arrangement of the white cube, and now, since it has been demolished, it shows its other side, the huge materiality which is placed inside, which you find inside this wall, which is framing art and is meant to carry paintings from 5 to 5 meters. And when I look at this small opening on the left-hand side, that suddenly by the way of demolition, other positive aspects, spatial aspects appear. Yeah. Very interesting. And the third picture is the Ding-Symbole, which is a German word, and I tried to find a translation into English. It doesn't exist. So it's a German, it's the symbol that appears often in a short story or a novel. Something useful, like the ring at the finger, which is lost, which falls into the water, and at the end is the magical moment of the whole story. I would call it here then points of sentimental value, is functional moments. This is from my model shop, and as you can see, it looks like amateur models, and we appreciate that here in my office a lot, to make really quickly very bad models, which show the essential moment, the point of sentimental value. And this is a collection of fragments. It's working models it's also, they are part of the demolition, you know, as you can see, they are cut out, the rest of it has been thrown into the waste paper box, and it's just, these are the, okay, this is the point here, Marius. And these are the small moments of a huge model, and this is like in life or like in a plan or an architectural piece. This is the small model, the small moment, the situation that you do not throw away while overworking. It's the essential small moment, and once you place these essential situations in this collection, they change their meaning, and this is why I thought this is also essential for this topic of ambiguity here, to say, okay, it might have been a staircase and now it's a leading moment. This was the three, I would say, framing key pictures, and this is like examples. Here, the walking staircase, which is this one, is a small project. And I would also say a Dingsemål, although I did not know this word when I was working on this project once. It's a staircase that leads to a roof terrace, and here in Berlin we have really bad weather, so you don't use your roof terrace most of the time. So in these times, the staircase can be folded, and it becomes another object. You can not even, if you don't want to, recognize it as a staircase. Actually, it has never happened because is absolutely not useful and makes no sense to use it as this piece. But it was great fun. It's a conceptual Mehrdeutigkeit, not a functional. Although it calls itself functional. This is another ambiguity also sitting in it. And yeah, we call it dancing stairs. And the wings on the left-hand side is just is a model. As you can see, it's a model snapshot in front of the mirror in my office, to see how this piece really wants to be seen or really looks like, and as you can, it enlarges itself through the mirror, and it's just two plasterboard walls in L shape, very functional, and they are for Wim Wenders, who, as you might know, the Wings of Desire, the Himmel über Berlin, who stamps his company's stamp or sign is the Wings of Desire, an angel wing. And this is the Mehrdeutigkeit, that this one just follows we found the word gestern, a vaulted ceiling, the vaulted ceiling of an old industrial building. And we worked on it to transform it into something which is much more than this, which is more or less can be seen as a wing of desire and not as a wall. And on the right hand side you see probably something which is really super amateur. This is the actually demolition too. I should think about my interest in demolition at these times here. This is the old office we used to share maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and it was a rental space, and in the middle of a quite okay room there was this ugly wall. It was not a folded wall or nothing, it was just a former chimney and cheaply rearranged, and I couldn't stand looking at this any longer, so I painted as an amateur for fun, and on a Sunday weekend I painted this square on it, which, as you see, is folded through the irregular background to give this wall this mehrdeutige, ambiguous moment of, you know, when I look at this wall, even now, I see the beauty of the square, the perfectness, the preciseness, the geometrical idea and I don't see this wall behind anymore. Do you see any sockets? I don't see sockets. I don't see a cheap floorboard, nothing. I see preciseness. This is why I took this picture. And actually I have to say that this collection of pictures, I decided to give myself 10 minutes to do it. I think at the end it was 12 minutes or so, yeah, and I'm right now, you know, it took me quite a long time to find the first 3 pictures. Then when Marius said, shall be at least 15 or 20, and it's 15, it went much faster. So thank you, Marius. This on the left-hand side is what you, so when it was just pictures of my office now. So as you can see, my office is my holiday or hobby or whatever. So there's no difference to my office than to the Uffizian in Florence, where I stood in a queue waiting. As you can see, it's not me only waiting. There's every square meter 2 people waiting to see some artwork. So me as an amateur photographer and also architect, I decided to check the floor, and this is what I found. And you look at this and look at this and look at this, and it becomes more and more complex and complicated because it's not a typical, for Germans, expected Fußbodenfliese, but it's also not the Renaissance 3D, or what Marius said, a floor has to be 3D once you do. It's not. It's just very complicated to be cut out, and they. It's not only this one. You don't know if it's maybe a new in-placed. It can be new. It can be old. It can be simple. It can be complex. This is what sits in this picture. And Marius, you combined it to the right-hand picture, which is kind of the opposite. This is on a construction site, but it's the room below the construction site. And what happened is that the carpenter, he broke through the ceiling because he didn't. He jumped next to the beam, and so his legs came on. He said, okay, no, don't worry, we fix it. And so I went there and I thought, oh my God. And then I found this and suddenly imagined that this is such a beautiful piece of art, this quickly fixed moment. Here you have on the floor the plastic to protect the linoleum, and this Keil so that it's solid, and on top you have this seemingly super great shape, which is the relation to the floor before, right? This shape of horizontal piece sticks protecting the hole in the ceiling. So when Marius said, so, oh, this is such a great form. Who designed it? Who designed this form of wooden piece? And you can say, no, it's an as found. This is just a piece of garbage that laid somewhere. So coming back to the first moment of context is you find a piece of wood laying somewhere, and it's a piece of garbage, and you place it on a stick in the middle of a room, protecting the whole. It's you ask where this form comes from. This is what interested me, or why I thought this is an okay picture to be shown. I hope you think it's half interesting or get my idea. And then this left-hand one is I would say, as always, things go in circles. Of course, this is a wing too. It's a piece of art. It hangs here in my office. Actually, nowadays I have 2 of them. It's from Icelandic artist Gudni Gudmundsdottir, and she calls it a cape. It's a textile piece of art that is placed on the wall. Of course, you could wear it as a cape as well. an angel's wing, so it protects you and it gives you stronger powers. You can fly, but at the same time you are protected. This all this sits in this piece of art. And when I had to decide about the colors of my repertoire books that you might know, Anna, I can show it to you. I decided. I knew, I think it shall be this blue. This is my graphiker. He asked me, he brought me samples and said, decide for the color. And I said, I don't know why, I think it's blue. And then this picture appeared when I noticed that, of course, I did not know why, but of course this color was the reason for the color of the books then. Sorry, my telephone here. Will stop soon. On the right hand side, I thought, why not talking about something that exists already, is from the book Quite Good Houses, that is already quite old, I think 2011 or so, when I decided to look at houses in this ambiguous way, to look at them as something. And just, this is also amateur work, because it's when you drive through here, Berlin area, Brandenburg, you see a lot of stuff, I would say. And this is when driving through the landscape, this is actually France, to be honest, saying like, let's stop, let's have a quick picture. That is quite good, isn't it? So this is what it sits in. So I see this house as a house, and I see it as a gestalt, as a morphological object, and to me it has sentimental value. It looks at me. I look into his eyes. Shall I do it some faster? But I'm really trying. So, and then maybe these next two pictures are just also parts of this book. And when you see the right house, which has a name, isn't that great? It's in Denmark, Anna Marie. And Anna Marie used to be a small house with the rooftop, and then someone thought there might be an extension on the right hand side, and suddenly you have a symmetrical, like a castle. It has a symmetrical door, and right and left these two windows, and so it's two things. It's ambiguous as well. And then the last three pictures of this first topic, I thought, are pictures as well. This is really my hobby, and I cannot stop doing this. It's just once you are trained to see the quality of things behind their function, or first reality, then I would say this is not only me. Many people, see things behind, like on the left-hand side, which is in Dessau, Bauhaus Dessau neighborhood, or the right-hand way. It is as if a photographer has cleaned the situation. It's in Poland, and cleaned the floor in front of the building to really focus on this beauty of a collage of a cheap dirty wall, cheap glued on seemingly monumental elements, an electricity box plus a telecom box or whatever. And by arranging this, which it has not been arranged, of course, it's as found, you see the sadness of the moment. By dressing up, it becomes more and more sad. This is why I have got this collection of these kind of pictures, and I don't know if this is the last one, Marius. You have to help me. And the last one is, I would say, keep it in mind, is the link to the next topic, which comes later on. It's the form, the shape of the house, wherefrom I can say, well, I'm sure that has been built between 1890 and 1920 because of its scale and height and shape of the roof, although it's nothing but a background for a painting, geometrical painting, to work against this form of the house. So it's both.
Yeah, all these facades are as geometrical, but they all somehow still, the shape of them has a very strong connotation of time and space. No, that's,
yeah.
Yeah.
So the shape is their origin. It's the construction. It's, you know, it happened, and then they have this geometrical a second layer of geometrical meaning, turning them into something more than they are, or less. Can also be. Okay, break. Thank you.
Is it is coffee break?
No, just talking.
Your break.
Your break, yeah. You have a coffee.
So those here, and the 24 people who are here, some of them might know MUF's tendency to brief obedience, to be obedient to a brief, briefly. And we were asked to start with a holiday photograph. And so I started in Sicily, in the Cava di Cusa, which is a quarry outside the classical city of Selinunte. And this is the quarry that was used to build the city. But the stonemasons downed tools in the quarry when they heard of an invading ship, and just everything was left as it was, mid-cut. And no one went again to cut anything from it. So it's held in a sort of point of fixedness. But this point of fixedness, slow down because I haven't got so very many slides. This point of fixedness is also a state of flux that somehow, actually, can you go back one, please? I'm trying to talk slowly like an architect, thank you. Can we go back to my first slide, Marius, rather than you speeding along? Yeah, so there is something about louche, about these pieces of column that demonstrate, I really feel this is a good first trip for the student, to demonstrate that classical architecture is just a game of the selection and ordering of components. And here they sit, careless, louche, celebratory, discarded, and quite menacing in a sense, as if they could easily roll and crush you. Next slide, thank you. But I think the ambiguity becomes much more explicit at this point. These are the points where the columns are half carved, and what you're left with is a stonemason sized corridor winds its way around the bulk of the rock, and so that's just wide enough to stand in and keep chipping away. And this, for me, is a good description of ambiguity, where meaning oscillates between solid and void, artifact and room. The column that makes the corridor sort of sits in the corridor. Next, I was trying to make it more chic for our viewers. Next slide, please. I'm quite comfortable with silence. And so I suppose when I look at that picture of the quarry, I do think of the missing matter. That corridor is also a solid of that concentric ring of stone. And the picture on the left was on the road home from the quarry, where there are two towns which each responded to the same earthquake. One town was repaired, so the buildings that fell were rebuilt. the other town was just moved. It was razed to the ground, and they built an entirely new town around about 5 miles away. And this, the photograph on the left was taken in a bar in that new town. And so I went thinking about the brief, which was to match, as far as I understood, Marius's invitation, holiday snaps with drawings from Drawing Matter. I went back to thinking about that missing concentric ring of stone, the one that had been removed to make the column, and made me try to think of, had I ever seen a drawing of a concentric ring of stone? And of course I had. Nancy Holt's drawings of placed 2 concentric rings, made apertures that lined up so that at a certain point light crisscrossed, and so it's a clock made not by shadow but by light. So that was my missing matter. Next slide, please. And I think if we think about what are the conditions for ambiguity to reside, if the first is, as you know, as you just say, is context that changes meaning, I think the second condition is precision, that in order for meaning to hover and for multiple meanings to be assigned, the viewer needs, or user needs to project onto it to be able to make it their own. So it can't be muddy. Like, there cannot be muddiness when it comes to establishing ambiguity, because if, in order for meaning to really be able to be vague. So again, it's the second drawing by Nancy Holt, and we're getting closer to that missing matter that sat around the column, that made the corridor and made the column. Next, please. And so I went to the archive to find the drawing, but there wasn't, whoever buys the drawing or charms the drawing or acquires a drawing hadn't chosen to acquire one from Nancy Holt, whose practice lasted from the 60s to 2014. And there was, I mean, you know, I looked first without the search engine, which we'd been given access to, and there were a lot of drawings in Drawing Matter, but there wasn't really any missing matter. And there was quite a lot of writing about drawings. As you can see, there's quite a lot of people writing about quite a lot of drawings on Drawing Matter. Next slide. And I wondered, as I looked at all these drawings, that page is called Authors, whether it was that that the collector of drawings of Drawing Matter wasn't interested in the work of the 1970s, particularly 80s and 90s, of those earth artists. And so this is the missing matter coming to sight in order to be placed precisely enough that the sun can move through the column, and that this can sit as the sister project to that piece of half-made building back in Sicily. But it's not that Drawing Matter is anti-conceptual art practice, because they actually have a drawing by Nancy Holt's collaborator. She established the foundation that those drawings come from. That's Robert Smithson. Nancy Holt was married to this man called Robert Smithson, so Drawing Matter did acquire his drawings. And I'm not beating up Drawing Matter. I mean, I first thought maybe I just hadn't sort of like worked the archive right. I mean, why should they have a drawing by Nancy Holt? So I asked, just out of interest, what percentage of drawings are by women, by the way? Is it 13%, 7%, 2%, or 0.6%, 0.6% of the collection? And you know, what I like about Neil is his, you know, a bit like that column line there is his, you know, his bravery. The first, if we think back to those first images, the column line in the quarry. And so, you know, he said, well, really much closest to the smallest number. In fact, I said 2%, but it's a bit less than 2%. And so it's a private collection. Why shouldn't he choose to have 99% drawings by women? But why am I here at this seminar? And but as Marius knows, you know, my MUF's definition of research is the research is the thing you get yourself, you do. The research is the thing you do to get yourself out of the situations you put yourself in. So being a polite and obedient person, having said yes to the invitation from Marius, this piece of work of going looking for the missing matter and realizing that we, us, me, my drawings don't matter to drawing matter, that's okay because it's a private archive. And you can choose, you know, you pay your money and you take your choice. Have you got 2 more drawings? Have you got my 2 more drawings, Marius? Oh, you've got 1 more drawing. Okay, so the next drawing was just this, like, if you go to our next slide, and then I think I've got 2 more drawings that I sent you. But, and then we'll go back to the relief. So I realize it's really easy to make an archive, a digital archive. So I've made one too, because how do we make the choices of what we put in our archive, and how do we choose what becomes part of a canon? It's just choice. So here's 2 drawings from my archive. I don't really know what we'll call this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, archive. And because so there's the choices of subjectivity. This is a drawing by a Part 1 student called Florence Naiga, who's graduated from Nottingham, and these drawings were not in her portfolio. Kind of on the one on the left, kind of fantastic. So if anyone's got a Part 1 job for Florence, that'd be great. I've got her email. And the one on the right is, if one is the act of subjectivity of whatever you fancy. That's right, it's fine. The one on the right is the example of nepotism. So this is a drawing by my daughter, Ray Fior, and it's a drawing in gold leaf. Ray had to put up with living in the studio for her entire childhood. So anyway, thank you, Marius, for giving me the opportunity. And I mean, Neil, let's have a conversation another day. And I'd like to say thank you to Neil in the same way that I so enjoyed exploring the Haydock drawing, which was a drawing again, which could have been said to be a drawing of ambiguity. And I'll put it up on perhaps we can somehow make it visible at the end of the session, because again, that was another situation to research one's way out of, and was fascinating. I'd love the opportunity to talk to someone at Cooper Union about it. So thank you, everybody. And I really enjoyed the first set of ambiguity and context. What's its official title for people that want to look it up? Marius, can you remember? It's called it's the house. Anyway, it's a house for a couple. It's a house for a couple where they're two almost identical houses that connect in the middle. What's it called? It's the rest of the session.
Yeah.
Anyway, I let's not get back. Let's not confuse matters. But I'd like to say, just as a great deal from that process, thank you so much for the invitation. And I look forward to an offline conversation about why women are allowed to work at drawing matter, but only if they look at men's drawings.
No, it would be wonderful to look at some
Another
wonderful
day.
Pinot
We'll
drawings.
have that
Yeah.
conversation. We'll have that conversation another day. Yeah.
Thank you, Liza. I think it's
Get
very
back to
valuable.
matter in hand. And we're ending it with Carlos Scarpa. And I think that we get back to the beginning. We're back at the quarry, where this exact positioning and the painting of the back of the wall, which is when you go, when you visit Sicily, when you visit Palermo, is that every time there is either a sculpture or a piece of relief, he paints the back of the wall in order that the void and emptiness can again hover, and that absence is allowed presence. Highly recommended. I'll put my jumper on now that I'm not in Sicily anymore. That's okay. The heating's not very good at this venue.
Establishment, venue, yeah. Sorry about it. Thank you, Liza. Wonderful. What came first? I'll go on to Thomas.
Yeah.
You have to unmute, Thomas, if you have to.
I am unmuted now, right?
Ah, good.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Also the other two contributions. And I particularly like the invitation to kind of use holiday pictures, since I always feel a kind of stranger myself while being on a holiday, and this kind of idea that the things you encounter on a holiday, since you don't mostly not fully aware of the context you're walking in or you're being in, kind of makes the thing you encounter with already a kind of not fully graspable observation. And that is particularly the case in this kind of building in Genova on the right, where I can have multiple interpretations, but they would be always different. So there's kind of many versions to the same story of this building. And it feels a bit like when you have a kind of circle of people and one of the persons steps in the circle and starts dancing. That's a bit the feeling I get when I look to this building. Like it draws all the attention to itself, but also feels a bit uneasy with this intention, and then pulls up this kind of magnificent dance. It can be read as a chapel, but there's also a kind of base which is different, and there's this kind of flower shop. Is it part of it or not? At the same time, if you look to the Asplund floor plan, there's a kind of formal arrangement of spaces, of proportions, but there's also kind of a few funny guys, like a few people who are invited to the party that kind of maybe slightly tipsy already, and that kind of have a bit more spontaneous arrangement, or kind of breaking this kind of formal layout of the plan. Next one, maybe. On the left, we see, and this I find a very kind of nice, but also very much confusing object. It's what I can read from looking at it is like first you see a table, which is kind of largely proportioned and kind of indicates a ritual or a kind of presentation of something. I can only guess of what it would have been. And this is also something nice, because this stems from my history and kind of relates to rituals that maybe are longer not really part of our common understanding. So it kind of gives place for kind of for speculation. But at the same time, while looking at it, you also find this object underneath it that is kind of cramped underneath and actually has a kind of completely different appearance. It's a tomb, so therefore also kind of hides something in the inside, and also transforms a table on the top, maybe not as a table, but kind of as a kind of covering of this tomb. so these two confuse each other, let's say. And then on the right, it's a kind of similar story on a completely different scale. It's the circus in Bath. And I first encountered this kind of circular space, rather formal, kind of homogeneous facade. And I mean, you can walk many times around it, but it will always be the same somehow. Of course, there's a certain depth in the facade, but it's very formal. And then maybe next slide. But the sparkle happens when you kind of walk around it from the backside. And there you see the kind of rebellion of the building, like that kind of the people dwelling in it almost don't accept this kind of formalization on the front, but actually started expressing themselves on the back. And building small castles, kind of trying to present a kind of completely different behavior on the backside. On the right is a chapel, formerly a chapel in the on the Vatican Island in Venice, presented in the Biennale 2018. And what I find quite funny, that this kind of presentation of a chapel without this kind of knowledge of that this would have been a chapel could easily be a kind of hot dog stand at a football match, or maybe an ice cream stand, or something that completely doesn't matches with this kind of formal function, but therefore I really enjoy it. And also the kind of maybe even the way it's been made, like that it's not really straight and that it's not perfectly made, actually adds on this kind of character of this building, and therefore also allows it for me to enjoy it in that way. Yeah. Then there's this other question. So we're talking about this idea of what came first, like the function or the expression, the city or the building around it. And the same I have with looking to this plan of Tony Fratton, which not at first sight is not completely clear if I'm looking to a kind of, let's say, readjusted existing building, or if this is a completely new building. There's all these kind of complexities that kind of make its reading unclear, and therefore at the same time very much interesting. What is inside, what is outside is kind of the shape of buildings, the kind of succession of spaces. Yeah. I think I have quite a lot of slides, so I will just kind of and then again also this building with Tony Fratton, which kind of, and while talking with Marius about it, and I see that he already plays a fantastic image next to it, comes into mind this idea of who came first. This building, was this building there before the rest of the buildings came around it? Was this actually this kind of confusion, because it seems so naturally there, like its figure, maybe even is reminiscent of an old lighthouse, what we've been talking with Marius on the right. It could have been that before the city ever happened, there was a lighthouse, and this building is being the last sign of this. Yeah, Marius? You have to unmute yourself, Marius. Sorry, I will, can I unmute?
Unmute. Thank you. Hi. So yeah, the castle tower in Kassel, which is, I guess, has been later on somehow improved, almost like a Tony Fretton, which has been added to Maastricht later on.
Groningen.
It had a very similar vibe.
Yeah, and the same goes a bit for this Poets building in Heerlen, which kind of very naturally mixes a shop on the ground floor with what I don't even know for sure if it's offices or a dwelling above, but the kind of proportions and also it's the kind of filling of this corner suggests that this building has been there longer than the city around it, and which I find a kind of very interesting thought.
I mean, it's like a lecture, yeah. Like an audience of 40 people to see you walk around.
Hello. Hi, Liza. I thought this idea of Thomas of asking what came first and somehow how this could be confused was quite intriguing, and somehow looking back at this building by Leverens in Stockholm, which I always read as something else. No, I always read it as somehow a next step in somehow abstraction, somehow a modern new thing, but somehow you can also read it the other way around, where it's somehow the origin points, the base form from which then later on the other facades were then decorated and adorned more and more. So I thought that was this flipping of the reading through Thomas's pictures was quite striking to me. And then maybe to go back to Bath, I always have to think of these Roman baths, which so beautifully build upon the ruins, but somehow almost used to ruin as a decor as a staged decor for the contemporary bath, or at least the contemporary bath of that time, which I think is always a beautiful juxtaposition in that sense. It's also confusing what's the use of what and what time layer serves what time layer in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And then on the right we see actually a very ordinary bistro, let's say for half the height of the room, and on the other half of the height we see this kind of majestic tiled ceiling, which kind of doesn't seem to match necessarily with the ordinariness of this bistro, but at the same time kind of celebrates it and kind of renders the ordinary as extraordinary. And this I really much enjoyed, also because it not only renders the bistro as extraordinary, but also actually I learned only after that there was an intervention by Lacaton Vazal, a very early intervention, and actually so it was not part of the building, so it actually was whereas it seemed to fit in this building. So all these kind of layers that actually kind of made it even more complex to fully understand. Yeah. Then we get to the work of Marius Evenhey, which I think this drawing that I found on the Drawing Matter Foundation kind of resembles this work very much. It's a kind of unclearness how to read this building. So there's a kind of certain languages that are kind of used freely and kind of unconventionally that make a multitude in interpretations possible. But also the idea of, and that's very nicely drawn, I think, in this drawing, the kind of question where this building ends and stops. I mean, there's a certain boundary, but within this boundary, where the garden starts and where the interior stops and where the garden ends, are kind of diffused, and the kind of boundary shifts and merges into one each other.
So a clear interest by the younger generation for female drawings, I guess.
Only one. Only
Only
one.
one.
Only
True.
one. It's the only one he could find. He said it was the only one he
There's a
could find.
2% is.
His, a friend of his said, make sure you show one drawing by a woman or you'll get in trouble. He said, this is the only one I can find.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, it's a beautiful drawing though, in its outer own right. I can see that you'd want your first drawing by a woman to be really good, and it's a lovely drawing.
Exactly.
I feel like going back to Sicily at this point. Oh.
And the same goes for these interiors pictures where you're not sure if you're actually in a kind of domestic space, because there's these kind of elements that kind of remind you of a castle, or kind of proportions of space that remind you of a barn, which kind of makes it kind of difficult to grasp the kind of formality of the space.
I don't know why I put this one next to
and then there's this idea of the opening, which I find intriguing. The opening could be kind of part of a composition from the outside, but more I find it interesting to see the opening relating to what happens in the inside. And you can kind of see in this facade of the Canterbury Cathedral that in this kind of formal kind of build-up of the facade, there's kind of openings that clearly don't take these kind of positions into account and just are there because they need to be there. And in a similar way, I quite like to read this design from Robert Gendaan for the TRT building in a similar way, where the openings are kind of maybe perhaps simply cut from the inside out, like as if it's a kind of piece of cloth, and people residing in the building or kind of living in the building or working in the building each have their own knife and basically cut out where they want to have a window or kind of view or an opening. And this kind of spontaneous kind of act of basically making a facade, I enjoy very much. Yeah. And then there's a question of what came first. If you think about building, so there's always this idea or the kind of sharpness of thought versus the kind of let's say the roughness of making, or the kind of looseness of figure, which I think is drawn very beautifully in this Brodsky drawing, where there's clearly an idea of the proportions or the system of the space, but at the same time using a kind of crayon that kind of blurs this meaning, or like even drawn without a ruler, and therefore the buildness, the drawing itself gets a certain looseness in its figure. It's what I find very much inspiring, and also what I recognize in the kind of making or the coming about of the building of Leeuwarens, where there has been a kind of preoccupied idea with how the building would have been made, but then confronted with a kind of slightly different sized brick, and therefore let's say the figure and the kind of making of the building kind of slightly changed and became a bit more loose, let's say, in its in the way it's been built, and accidentally gave this kind of fantastic brickwork. And the same goes a bit for another building of Leeuwarens, where seen from the outside you would probably make 100 guesses, but you would never guess that there would be a flower shop in the inside, which I find a very nice and kind of almost poetic contradiction. and actually from the inside it makes a lot of sense. And also the kind of loose placement and not knowing exactly where the building stops and starts. Are these lamps part of the building? Because there's a kind of roughness in detail and a roughness in finish that kind of makes this reading kind of confusing. Yeah. And yeah, even looking at it more zoomed in, the kind of position of the window and bringing in the greenery of the trees also kind of confuses this idea of inside outside. Yeah.
Wow.
Then there's this building from Zumthor, which kind of for me is most ambiguous in this idea of the door, where from a distance it could be this kind of I mean, maybe not even a building, it's a kind of piece of land, like a stacked piece of land. But when you come to this other side, this like here the door is open, but actually arriving to this kind of suddenly different material and also a proportion that you wouldn't necessarily recall as a kind of formal door, kind of opens as if you're kind of suddenly in a kind of James Bond movie, and kind of gives a bit of feeling as if you're unlocking how do you say that? A vault, like a sorry?
I know that you're going to say a secret bunker.
Exactly, like a vault, like no, so not a vault.
A vault.
The thing that you have, a safe. Yes, exactly.
A safe room.
Thank you. So this meaning of a chapel is kind of completely contradicted, let's say.
So what happens inside?
What happens inside? And what happens inside is actually a very
in your mind, at least.
No, this is secret territory.
That's a secret territory also.
I'm not sure why these are two together. The drawing and the Zumthor space are together. But if I look at this drawing by Paul Robrecht, I see a kind of unclarity in if I'm looking to outside representation of a building or an inside capturing of the space, which is also a very fragile, let's say conception of what a building can be. And I think that kind of probably relates to the second series of holiday pictures that I have come across. This idea of, here on the left we see a standard seat, and what I find interesting here is that it's not certain where there's a kind of there's a roof, there's a kind of formal shape of a roof, but like the kind of building that normally supports the roof is missing, and instead there's this kind of landscape running under it on a kind of derelict industrial site, but the landscape itself has a kind of friendliness and a kind of spontaneousness that doesn't care much about the kind of almost rough edges of the site.
I believe the architects of this building, Murmur, AE Architects, and Carton 123, they also, maybe not in this part, but in the other part, specifically use the parts of the existing shed, and maybe these beams are actually indeed dead, and reassembled them partly with new interventions. So it's in that sense also really as found. And this guy here, he even asked to be able to join this court. This is a guy's backyard window. was later implemented into the corpus.
Mm. But here again, it's really kind of unclear what came first. Was there first the roof? Was there first the beams? Was there first the landscape? And the same goes a bit for this picture on the right on a completely different scale. Also a kind of informal arrangement of branches. And only by looking a few times you understand that they are actually put against trees. So that means that there must be somewhere in the middle a column, and kind of only by the feature of this column transforms that into a kind of informal space, nearly, or kind of construction or a building. Where at the same time, this column has the same materiality or even almost the same kind of thickness as the branches that are put against it, and therefore kind of are unclear if they're part of the stack or not. Yeah. And I think this is the last picture of this series. I think my most recent picture was of a day trip to the beach, and while kind of walking through this dune landscape, I came across this kind of concrete wall, which I was surprised about. I didn't know about it, and I started looking it up, and it's actually the meaning of it completely transformed everything I imagined from this wall. It's kind of very soft and gentle shape, this kind of meandering through the landscape, almost rendering all the trees around it kind of small and kind of friendly. And but actually it's part of the kind of Atlantic wall structure, and kind of was built to kind of protect for tank invasion, and kind of, so this kind of contrast in kind of me reading it from the outside as a kind of amateur nearly, and the actual meaning of the building, I think also relates to this idea of confusion on what came first.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Very interesting. What came first, function 1 or function 2? So I started, and now I find myself within a context. So I'm a different person. It's my ambiguity right now. I can say, I would say I'd continue where Thomas ended. My second topic is what we called yesterday function and meaning, not context. I mean function and meaning. This is like my Umberto Eco attempt to read Umberto Eco in total. Is really hard. No pictures, but he speaks something that really touched me a lot when he talks about the architectural function 1 and function 2 of elements in our surrounding. So in this, the function 1, for example, of a throne is to be a throne, to get this ritual for to be the place for the queen or king. And the second function is to sit on it. It's not a chair, it's a throne. And this is the way, once you start looking at things in this way, it's really, it enlarges the world to you. So I would say these next two pictures, this is house left, and the next one, maybe Marius, you show it as house right, and you can switch, okay, go. This is fine. House right and back house left is in my series of taking snapshots of houses around, and I noticed, okay, this function 1 of a house is being a house. And me as a collector, as a collector of ideas, it's the function 2 is maybe the most important function of it. It's a collective, it's an image. it's part of collective memory, and it tells me about former times, and it tells me about where I find myself, in which context I find myself. This roof, the shape of a roof has no regular function at all anymore nowadays. The chimney doesn't work and so on. But being seen as a fragment, it means a lot to me. We go on, and I place this into the context of Bruno Reichlin's Casa Tonini, which is function 1, a house where you can live in, a family house, but function 2, also meant by Reichlin, it's a conceptual idea, it's a spatial result of conceptual thinking based on Palladio's quoting Palladio, and having to place a chimney in front of it, and deciding not to have one chimney but to transform the chimney into an arch, so giving it an ambiguous meaning by itself. But this is not what I'm talking about, because I'm not explaining Reichlin, why I thought I should put it here as a holiday picture, actually. So what is my holiday? Trying to find the pieces of architecture that I wanted to find since ages, and there are a lot. Marius told me he also has this list of holiday goals, journeys that have to be done sooner or later. So I really wanted to see this house, and this is why I place it here. Function 2 being a part of my memory, being a part of my education, much more than just a house to live in. And I think it's so interesting, because once you find these elements, then you have been waiting a long time to do the journey. Then you really have a long journey to find it. Then you need often long time to find them. And then you are there. And then they are, most of the time, we spoke also about the Narkomfin house, for example, in Moscow, or some things also Thomas showed us. And then they are so small and gray, and then this comes this moment when you are not sure if it really is the Villa Tonini or just a house. And this is so super interesting. And you know, you wait until you tell your friend, now we've found it, because it would be so embarrassing if it's not. And I had this, Marius spoke about the Narkomfin house, and I was there last year, and it wasn't a ruin anymore, but it was in the hands of Russian investors. So it's a demolition and construction site. You know, I couldn't decide, was this a construction site or a demolition site? And at the same time, really standing there in front of an ugly building. Also here, the Casa Tonini was really gray and small, not knowing if this is really, or is it just a house? And so this is what sits in this picture. And the next, please.
Yeah, so my German partner Jantje put this on our traveling list. I guess it's more German than Dutch in that sense. But maybe to talk about.
Can I just interrupt, Marius, just for a second? I really think you should write that down. That sounds like a fantastic text on architectural pilgrimages and the moment where you're looking at everything with the same amount of attention, because you're trying to establish. It's a bit like the same point as the flower shop, of establishing intent and accident, and that in doing so, that act of transformation of the as found in your naming or questioning of what you're looking at. I hope you can write something, because that's the other. I know it's not like the lovely. That's the other lovely thing about drawing matter, is the writing. Maybe you could quickly write it for their competition, or do you have to be a child to do that? I'm not sure. Please write it down, though.
Three writing briefs from you and Matt asking me to write about things, but this can definitely be added to that list.
Please write that down. It's fantastic.
No, but it was indeed in a conversation with Oda yesterday evening. also when I was at the Narcofilm building in Moscow, it was a ruin indeed, and somehow I completely realized, but it was beautiful to me, no? Even though it's like this this Greek myth of this sailing boat where somehow every wooden board was replaced by a different wooden board, but yet the building still carries the enigma of the original myth of the boat that's actually not there anymore. And that's definitely with this Narcofilm building as well, that you somehow have this feeling of this collective memory and somehow being there and somehow projecting this meaning onto it somehow actually is of value. So maybe these things don't have a value for the larger public, but definitely for our culture was not unimportant. And another building that I would like to maybe add to that is this Villa Ungers built for themselves in the Eifel, which I visited with my bachelor students. And it's also an enigma because it's, of course, it explains so much, but it's so hard to find somehow peace with it. Somehow it keeps on challenging you, and somehow liking it or not liking, or it's not about that at all, but it somehow really tries to also convert this idea of this Palladian villa into Ungers his mathematical mindset. And actually, I'm quite glad Oda brought up this building in Switzerland, that I had to go back to this building, because looking at the pictures, I understand it more now. It stands there with very small windows, and it's really an inside experience. You're almost not outside. All the furniture is arranged like chess pieces on a grid. They also fit together like Duplo blocks almost, and the only thing that moves freely through the house is the dog that somehow still is conscious of the symmetry of the stair, I guess, in that sense. So maybe he has lived in the house for long enough. This is Sophia Ungers, the daughter's dog. And then but I'm quite starting to appreciate this bunker, this Palladian bunker that Ungers built. And then in the garden, he builds this little folly where he puts his own white sculptures next to copies of the antiques, which also of course completely connects to this story of this somehow our examples, our somehow history that we have to deal with, and which we have to face, and where we somehow project, where the process is more present in the subject of us as a viewer than it's actually in the objects themselves. So I thought it was a beautiful narrative.
This picture, the next picture, thank you, Marius. Yeah, and it's a new house on my list to go to, the Ungers house. And then I decided to bring this snapshot from below into the Klaus Anhelm's rooftop window in Malmö, which is really simply, it's also like the flower shop of Leverens, simply brought together most simple elements and materials to something so complex and well working and beautiful and inspiring, that I couldn't help to do it, and it influences my work and everything so much. And this can be also the socket on the left-hand side. You remember then telling me, do you see a socket? Oh, this is interesting, comes up to me. Do you see a socket in this square wall that I had? And here's the socket of Anhelm, obviously placed by him very precisely on a place where it looks like as if it just happened. I love it.
Very practical as well.
Very practical and very simple. Yeah. and then it's the small monument enlarges itself by being added into a certain amount of numbers into something even more precise. And also then the Sana Zeche Zollverein in Essen, which I visited, you know, because it's a monument, you have to see it once. Once you are in the area, just go and look at it. And this picture taken by me from inside, then I wasn't expecting something that touches my heart. And I went into the building and it touched my heart when I saw that the foreign architects being invited to upgrade the neighborhood, how much they integrated the neighborhood, and really it's one. This working class neighborhood is now in the building, and it's a combination that is it was spectacular. Suddenly by me, I knew why this building is important. Zeche Zollverein. And from outside, I don't have a picture. To me, all sits in this bringing the existing situation, framing it, and hang it on the wall as a picture.
No, we also talked about it yesterday, how Sana is always incredibly context aware and somehow fits these buildings so well to their context. But then the ironic thing is that then the architecture of Sana has then somehow such an international reach that it's constantly taken out of context. And somehow all these Sana clones, they don't have this this village of Duisburg as a context, and which is actually maybe they need it as well. Maybe one building that does it right, but maybe there was there before Sana, is this building by Stefan Behl in Zulte, the museum for Roger Ravel. He was a local resident of Zulte and makes these beautiful colored pictures of farmers' life in Zulte, and it has all these beautiful layers towards these messy Belgian contexts. And coincidentally, my son was wearing my old sweater that my grandmother knitted for me, and he also fitted well to the paintings very beautifully. But what's beautiful about the building of Behl is that he has these beautiful windows, very unapologetically framing the village of Zulte, which is this very Belgian situation, which is in a way everywhere. These are out of order. And you really see this beautiful resonance between the village and the paintings. And definitely when you afterwards take a walk through the neighborhood, you also see these paintings of Ravel all of a sudden everywhere, because in this museum this village was very starkly put against this context. And it's like looking at Kirchner paintings in Davos. They were made of the landscape of Davos. And if you look at a Kirchner painting in Berlin, you think, wow, this is an incredible, colorful painting, and it's so abstract and so interpreted, subjective. But then if you see a Kirchner painting in Davos, all the colors of the warm sunlight and the fresh green leaves and the blue mountain shadows are completely there, and there's almost no interpretation. So looking at things in context and somehow having these things project on top of each other, I think can be wonderful stories to add. I'm noticing that the presentation is flipped, so you always have to imagine the drawing on the left next to the drawing on the right. But I guess that's going to be a hard sell. So we deal with it. Thank you, Oda.
And yeah, thank you. So this is seemingly a krasse next step, but this right picture, Anonym in the Engadin, the two small windows protecting and bringing light in summer and protecting in winter, heavy snow, as you, all elements of heavy weather sit in a rural context, which is actually totally different, but at the same time, of course, very similar to your picture on the left-hand side. It's nothing special, you know. It's not a Renaissance church or nothing. It's a rural double window, which is upgraded by a painting. And so first you think that the window might be the necessary or important function, but of course the painted frame around these two windows that has no function. Has got the second function of showing, upgrading, enlarging, giving another scale, showing the wealthiness of the inhabitants or pretending it also. Next. Because, and of course, this was window 1 and window 2, and here is then color and color, which is the super castle Liselund in Denmark and Møn, and what you see, it's in a Scandinavian classical wooden tradition. You have a wooden floor, which has got this first function of being a very good wooden floor, warm and stable, and then you see the color on it. It's painted in a very simple way to look like a marble stone floor, which is of course the second function of this, the ambiguity of this floor, telling me that I'm now in the main room of a castle and no longer in a house in Scandinavian.
In a way, it's so. We talked about this yesterday as well, that some of these Scandinavian cultures, as they only had wood available, they somehow had to reinterpret many of these other European styles on top of this wood. So a red Scandinavian painted building is often also referring to a red brick building, and a yellow Scandinavian painted building is often referring to a natural stone yellow building, and this is no different. And of course, what's wonderful also is, of course, and that this is also completely conceived. No, well, there's a small mountain village in Italy. I also found these conceived painted marble plants, slates. But then the interesting thing is that then the real marble church is actually underneath. So there's this confusion of control through this painting on top of it. And I think when it also becomes then very beautiful, I guess this villa in Denmark that Oda showed is very controlled. It's built at once, and somehow was always meant to be painted like that. But what might be beautiful, if my computer allows me to do it, is to also look at these moments where indeed different time layers have different ambitions, and where the one logic is somehow painted on top in one way, and the other logic is built on top in the other angle in this other church in Italy. And this is a beautiful palace in Turin where they really had almost like a cardboard like, yeah, sorry, I have a lot of images referring to this, should have said more cardboard like framing. So it's a very low polygonal shape, almost like an old computer game where then all the detail was applied on purely by drawing, and it's beautiful to see this contrast between the ambition to create something incredibly elaborate, but then this simple geometric, almost paper-like shapes underneath it actually makes it something truly astonishing in that sense. And they use these funny ways that there's a cutout of a flat board painted with this relief, but then there's a real face on top. And maybe then that story ultimately leads to Gottfried Semper in the opera in Dresden, which is maybe an advanced version of this fakeness, because these are actually not marble columns, but they're plaster columns, and they're plaster columns made by somehow mixing plaster in large 1 by 1 meter blocks, and they mix it somehow in a certain way to then afterwards peel it off, almost like a multiplex layer sheet, peel off this fake plaster, and then very controlledly wrap all these designed shapes in this fake marble made out of plaster. You could say maybe it's, of course, in that time it would have been cheaper to use the labor than to get the marble from Italy, but I think it was also an approach to somehow to almost have the building feel like a model, to somehow lose its sense of scale. And I think this controlling by painting also does that in a way. Ironically, then of course, when Dresden was bombed heavily in the Second World War, the renovation of this building was would have been a lot cheaper if they could have just used marble instead of trying to dig up this old technique to again make these fake plastered shaven columns. Right, there you see it up close. But they're beautiful. They have a similar, and I do think they have a similar quality to these painted floors and ceilings, where it's somehow, it's a very rational way of somehow, it's really a picturing of something else, but you still see the rational layer in between of not just the concrete material, but also of just the conscious recreating, almost representing of that material, which also in the staircase definitely is the case.
Yeah, and I continue with my staircase that I found in Riga in a Russian Orthodox church, pretending to have a carpet. And I couldn't stop watching it, so I really, it was really hard to do this picture. This was highly controlled by monks, and I love so much that this carpet has no function as a carpet, but as a symbol, a thing symbol to tell me the importance of this staircase. And by it's, you know, it's not this highly academic fake marble painting, but it's so poor. It's poor and it's rich at the same time. I love it. And the next one is as well a staircase that combines, this is Black Beauty, it sits in an industrial space in Berlin, and it's a post-Republic studio. It's you know, you cannot be more modern than these guys post-producing movies, and they got a staircase which combines the poverty of the Russian Orthodox Kirche plus the collective memory of the house that I showed at the beginning. It is a wing of desire and a Black Beauty, and it looks like as if it has always been there. It looks like an as found, but it's a fictionalisierung. Of course, it's fiction. It has never been there. But I think they wanted to get a super duper modern steel staircase to show their way of life, and what they got is a simple as found object, and everybody loves it. And then you can see it's quite huge when you combine it with the door in the background. And I loved it when the fire police came and then put this green sign on the wall showing go away. Yeah, this is why I showed it, because I think it's very simple and very complex at the same time. and it has a function to be used as a staircase, but the sign says don't use it as a staircase, use it as a part of a piece of memory. Is this recorded? I never wrote it down in this good quality.
And a perfect example of a dingen symbol.
Yes, it's a ding symbol. Anything around can be any. I don't mind. You know, we have. I would say it was 1,800 square meters around. My focus is I need the picture of the staircase to present this. No, is a lot more. But yeah, it's a ding symbol.
I feel it's a new word that the English should adopt from the German language, like kindergarten or Schadenfreude.
Maybe. I learned it from my daughter when she was in 12th class and had to analyze a novel. And I said, yeah, let's talk to me and I can listen, you know, and then it's for her Abitur. And then I thought, oh my goodness, ding symbol, this is actually also ambiguity, no? This means a lot to me suddenly. So, and right is the mirror that was placed in the exhibition presenting my repertoire books in the Architekturgalerie, where I decided to do nothing but a mirror, so that once you stand outside the gallery, you can see the whole exhibition in that mirror, because it reflects, you don't see yourself, it's a vampire mirror as well, you can stand in front of it, you don't see yourself because it goes in the other direction. And the way we did hang the exhibition was that I was standing here looking into the mirror and someone put the pictures on the wall so that they fit into the mirror. This picture is not showing the exhibition because it's not about my work, but about the ambiguity of this element here. And so this mirror is meant to show the beauty of things, how they see, how they want to be presented, and not how, you know, not to show me. Sorry. Okay. Next. It's a ding symbol at its best, right? Of course, and it's inspired as well by Rodney Graham, Les Dernières Merveilles de la Science, which I would say also by Mehrdeutigkeit. I would now come to that point where I would say I don't have to explain you the meaning of what this. It has a function 1 and function 2, and I don't mind which one function you see in it. So go your own way, I would even say. But I'm still in this mirror topic, which is not about materiality or beauty or nothing, but about, to me, about idea and meaning. And this is from the catalogue of a Bolshoi, Onegin. This is Onegin and the young girl loving him so much, and but of course he's not the good one. He's the hero, but of course not the good one. And he appears in her dreams and in her memories, and there is no mirror and no glass on stage because this is the best ballet dancers on earth.
Oda, sorry, can I quickly interject, because I just got a message from the Arctic Foundation that the next event starts in 10 minutes. So I would like maybe
that is good for me, because my event starts in 10 minutes.
That's also good.
I stop.
So, but let's go to the last.
So, and
I think the chairs are beautiful, no?
Maybe my Ungas chair is the beginning of all this. The Ungas chair in the Deutsches Architekturmuseum is probably, to me, the most powerful, meaning 1 and meaning 2, function 1 and 2. This chair, everybody knows, is super uncomfortable. You can read it everywhere. And I said, it's so comfortable to me when I sit on it, because finally I reach my goal. I sit here straight, not here, there, on Ungas Stuhl. You know, it's hard and I have to sit straight, but I feel the total energy of the concept of the concept of the concepts of the concepts. And this is why I showed this. And this is a typological row of chairs that me and my students once placed there. When we found these chairs, you see them missing in the rows, and figured out how playful Unga's worked on this obviously precise conceptual idea of Thematisierung. Okay, thank you. I'm finished. I'm through.
Unmute, Thomas. Thank you, Oda. It's wonderful. And
yeah, thank you
very
so much for letting me tell you these stories.
This is the chapter oddness, no?
oddness.
Yeah.
Good.
What's so odd about this, Thomas?
So let's first have a look to this particular drawing of Sohn, which in itself is I think a very strange drawing. It's somehow the building is very precise, and you see all these planks and a kind of certain symmetry. But then when you look to the paving or to the path, it's a kind of very kind of loosely drawn, almost picturesque, romantic path, and kind of, as we discussed also with Marius, kind of is not suddenly not clear if you're looking to elevation or perspective, and also looking to the frontal of to the facade elevation of the drawing. You would not necessarily have guessed the plan that goes with it. Then maybe to this funny encounter I had in Maastricht, which I think is a nice example of maybe kind of urbanistic photobombing by this church in around the corner, kind of pulling a funny face. I particularly like this kind of red cat flap in the top, which is a small door that can or cannot be opened.
And a little temple on top, no?
And a little temple on top. I mean, there's many things probably that can be described as odd. Yeah, let's continue. I think we have to. And then there's this kind of carved out shed in Park Middelheim, which anyway has a kind of fantastic collection of odd buildings. But what is particularly nice here is that the kind of bottom part could be a kind of joint bay windows, kind of inverted. But in the top is a kind of very much shrinked, but still too large roof of a barn, and then kind of combined in a pavilion-like building.
Yeah, I've been to most of your references 5 years before you, I think, Thomas. And the funny thing is that they always look older in my pictures, but they should have been somehow even aged more in your image. So it's interesting. But I think the thing we talked about oddness indeed is somehow the fact of somehow all the familiar objects somehow assembled together in a strange way. Which is definitely also this other building, of course, in the Middelheim Park, where they have the beautiful familiarity of this half timber house, but then somehow assembling it using untreated wooden beams, making it this completely bizarre, almost grown structure. Definitely reminding me of your image there.
Yeah, in a similar way, the straw roof of this Toshikomori building in Senegal, which there always it refers, of course, to the technique that is locally used, but kind of scaled up in such a way that it almost feels not anymore like a building. It's especially from a certain perspective, it could also be kind of an animal laying there to rest. That can be woken up any moment, which is a kind of also kind of has this kind of odd features. Yeah. Maybe I wouldn't necessarily describe merely as odd, but I think they're kind of arrangements of this kind of classical elements in the classical buildup of the building, in reference to this classicism, can be kind of perceived as a kind of nearly frivolous use of the language, and in a similar way, this Casa Borgo by Scarpa also uses these kind of elements, but kind of starts floating them around the building and lets them be on certain positions and leaves them away on others. Yeah.
For me, this is a beautiful comparison because it somehow gives me the illusion that Scarpa was looking at Otto Wagner as well, which I've never somehow connected to before in that sense. And then I guess the Villa Rottmeier as the partner of Scarpa's as Plečnik's constructor, who was of course a student of Wagner, makes it a nice full circle.
And even this villa is a kind of copy of a building of Plečnik. So there's also this kind of idea what came first, again maybe, but also the kind of disproportional, let's say, the staircase, which is actually on the back, or is it? Is it the back or the front? Kind of renders it as a kind of difficult to read kind of building. Yeah, I think we have a few more. Looking forward to get to these competence because I've seen them already on the notes of the first slide, the post-it.
There no? Yeah.
Sorry?
I'm afraid we have reached the end. We've got another.
We have reached the end. This is it.
Yeah. So
thank you.
Bringing down the curtain.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Like I said, we can go on forever. This is beautiful.